Well, philosophers would say, well, you can't just claim that, well, we're all born and we're all going to die, right? Because those are empirical facts about us, and someone who is a defender of extensionism or the two-theory approach or the abstractive approach and so on could say, yeah, of course, I mean, how could I not concede that? But that's not central to agency, right? For modeling my moral subject and the relations of that moral subject to future generations, I don't have to take that into account, somebody could say. Because these are empirical facts. Like when I model my subject, I also don't take nose length into account, or hair color, or skin color. I don't take those into account. I abstract from those in order to give an account of moral subjectivity. And so someone could say birth and death, they're not central to they're empirical facts for sure, but they're not central to a conception of agency. And again, so you have to be able to say something in response to that. To do that, I draw on Heidegger, Levinas, Hannah Arendt, Luz Irigaray, and a number of other thinkers. But I know that some of you here are familiar with Heidegger, working on Heidegger. And the basic argument in Heidegger's first major work, Being and Time, is in fact that human agency draws on or lives in a finite temporality in which the relationship to death is constitutive of agency, central to agency. You can't do without it. He calls this being towards death. Now you might say, well, why is that? Well, it's a long account. It's a big book, and it doesn't lend itself to easy summary, but for the purposes of this talk, it's hard to avoid. So the argument goes something like this, in a very sketchy form. To be an agent is to understand one's present time not as if it was fixed, but as to be. So it's central that you see your own time as full of possibilities, so that your current situation isn't trapped into a causal chain, but is in fact such that there are possibilities that you can realize and others that you can then no longer realize. Right? So choosing one possibility means losing other possibilities, opening up new ones, hopefully, but closing doors to other possibilities. That's what it is to be an agent. So an agent has to display a temporality that isn't a linear temporality, right? That isn't just a straight line. That can't be it, because then there wouldn't be any agency. There wouldn't be any possibilities for choice. But the realization of possibilities demands that my life is grasped as mortal. That is, to grasp my time as to be is also to grasp this to be as not forever to be, but as having a finite structure to it. That is, as coming to an end at some point. Now, why is that? I have found over the years that the quickest way to explain that without, as it were, going through Being and Time is by drawing upon Simone de Beauvoir's novel, All Men Are Mortal. You know the novel? Because it gets much more complicated in the novel. But basically there is a character who is not mortal. He takes a potion in the early Middle Ages and he becomes immortal. And when we, the readers, encounter Fosca, that is his name, he is totally incapable of acting. Nothing interests him. Anything has lost any sort of interest for him, and he's very destitute. He regains a little bit a sense of the meaningfulness of life by engaging in a love relationship with a woman who is motivated to be associated with him, who is immortal, because she wants him to remember her forever. So she wants immortality, and he wants her mortality. So you see, it's very interesting the way that the novel is set up. But basically what this means is if you were immortal, then it wouldn't matter that you're spending time with us here. It wouldn't matter because it wouldn't rule out anything else. It wouldn't matter that you choose to become a philosopher, because you could be a philosopher for 500 million years, and you could also then still become a hairdresser or a carpenter or what have you for another 500 million years. It makes no difference what you choose, right? So this is sort of gives you at least an inkling as to why Heidegger would claim that being towards death is disclosive of agency. So you require that relationship to death. So you can't take the mortality out of the human being and still take it to be a human agent. You can't do that. Right? That's what this establishes. Now, we're going very quickly here. Levinas has then, so the French philosopher Emmanuel Levinas has basically said, well, that's all great. He calls this a necessary passageway, passage obligatoire. So, you got to do being in time. Before you do anything else, you have to do being in time. However, there's one crucial point where he disagrees with Heidegger, and that is that he thinks that death is not just individuating. It's not just what gives me my singular capacity for agency, not just, because it does that too, but death is inseparable from other people. If I am mortal, then I am also affectable by others. Death and other people cannot be accessed independently of one another. Whenever you access your mortality in order to disclose possibilities for action, you will encounter other people. Now, you might have questions about why he makes that point, and we can talk about that if you want. Maybe I can defer that a little bit. But it's actually a widespread notion, especially in French philosophy after the Second World War, this idea that with death come other people, and that you can't separate these two. Okay, so that's now if that's true, however, so if in encountering one's death, one also encounters other people who, like us, are thereby rendered by mortality, are rendered vulnerable, rendered affectable. So they're not immortal, but they can be affected. They are vulnerable. Then agency is always opened up, or always comes to birth, in relationship to another person who can outlive me, right? Who can live beyond my life, whose lifespan may extend beyond mine. Right? So then it's not just that I need to access death in order to disclose my agency, but in that disclosure, I'm at the same time accessing a world of people beyond my death. So there is a world of people beyond my death, and Levinas argues that mortality on the face of another person always calls on me not to kill the other person. So mortality comes with a demand. It does so in Heidegger too. In Heidegger, it comes with a basic demand, the call of conscience, to disclose possibilities of agency for me. That's what he calls authenticity. In Levinas, the claim is, yes, but the demand to responsibly disclose possibilities is always undertaken in view of another who may outlive me. So this is what he calls being for beyond my life. So from being towards death, we go to being for beyond my life. Okay. So that means then that the generational relation to future people is co-constitutive of agency, if that argument goes through. Similarly, the relationship to previous generations. So that's a relationship to future generations, but you can make a similar argument drawing on some related literature, also coming out of a reading of Being and Time, with respect to birth. And you can, I mean, the most famous argument in that respect that privileges what is then called natality, so the relevance of birth for human agency, you find in Hannah Arendt's book, The Human Condition. Hannah Arendt, like Levinas, a student of Heidegger's, also drawing on Being and Time to some extent, but now making natality, the fact of birth, more central. And there the argument then is that each time we act, as it were, we are giving birth to ourselves anew. We are drawing upon the fact that our birth was not a birth into a mere causal chain, a birth, for example, into a species where our species being would determine what we do and how we act out possibilities. Now that's how Hannah Arendt thinks of animals. I'm not sure I want to go with her on that, but you get the idea. So if birth was just birth into a causal chain, there wouldn't be any freedom either. Birth has to be such that it is birth into a causal chain that I can interrupt or that I can begin, as Kant would say. And so each time I act then, I reenact the fact that my birth was not a birth into a fixed deterministic causal chain. That's basically the conception of natality. So now, and several authors in the literature, in particular Irigaray, Caballero, and Lisa Günther, have then argued that this account of birth implies not just the ontological significance of birth, but implies a normative relationship to previous generations. You can see why this would be of particular relevance to feminists, because the birth giver is the mother. So in Luz Irigaray's conception, the mother plays a big role, her claim being that most models of subjectivity, in fact, suppress the relationship, the birth-giving relationship to the mother. Okay, so, but what we then end up with is that agency is to be thought as discontinuously linked to one's birth, and thus also to previous generations.